Chapter 10 Unavoidable, Part 1. Newlywed lawyer HeYiSheng was busier than ever before. The cases he had taken earlier were still ongoing, and recently, due to personal connections, he had taken on a tricky new case as well. Several cases were progressing simultaneously, and he found himself working late into the night every day. Often, Mosheng would fall asleep while waiting for him, and his study room's light would still be on. Despite this, Mosheng felt very happy. When Yichen was busy, she would find things to do on her own, keeping herself occupied. Occasionally, she would peek into his study, but Yichen was always engrossed in his work without exception. At such a close distance, Mosheng truly understood how diligent Yichen was. People saw HeYiSheng as young and successful, which evoked envy, but they had no idea how much effort he put into things behind the scenes. As someone without a powerful background, it must have been very difficult for him to reach his current position. However, during his toughest times, she wasn't by his side. When Yichen came out of his study holding an empty teacup, he saw Mosheng sitting on the couch, holding a cookbook and lost in thought. It was now Sunday afternoon. Yichen had been busy in his study all morning, hastily eating lunch before returning to work. Seeing him, Mosheng immediately put down the book and jumped up from the couch. "I'll make tea." Happily, she took his cup and ran to the kitchen. As Yichen looked at his empty hand, he suddenly felt a sense of time rewinding. It seemed like he had returned to the past, during their university days when he was busy with studies, work, and student council activities, and Mosheng would slip into his busy schedule. Although it seemed like Mosheng had occupied a lot of his time, in reality, he hadn't devoted much of it to her. Now, it felt like history was repeating itself. When Mosheng brought the hot tea to the study, Yichen pulled her over. "Do you have plans for the afternoon?" "What for? Are we going out?" Mosheng's eyes lit up, filled with excitement. The look of anticipation erased any lingering doubts in Yichen's mind. He turned off his computer. "Well, it's the centennial celebration of C University today. The law firm has made some donations to the law school, and Lao Yuan is attending the donation ceremony. He's been encouraging me and Xiangheng to join the celebration. I'm not that keen on going, given the heavy workload, but now I'm a bit undecided." For such a lively event, Mosheng naturally wanted to go. When Yichen and Mosheng arrived at the university, the place was so crowded that the car couldn't get in. Yichen parked the car in a distant parking lot, and they walked to the campus. "Wait a moment." Halfway there, Mosheng stopped and pointed to the roadside stalls selling t-shirts with C University printed on them. "Yichen, shall we get these?" Yichen frowned, finding the idea quite odd, but Mosheng held his hand and refused to move, so he helplessly said, "You go ahead and buy." Mosheng had rushed out of the house in the morning without her wallet, so she took some money from Yichen's wallet and successfully came back with 2 t-shirts from the crowd. Both of them were now dressed in casual sweaters. Mosheng wore the C University t-shirt on top of her loose sweater, making her look chubby and a bit funny. On the other hand, Yichen, with the same dressing style, still looked elegant and imposing, attracting the attention of passing girls. It seemed like it had always been this way. Back in their college days, Yichen was always the center of attention, and he appeared indifferent to those gazes. Mosheng tugged at his sleeve. "Yichen, don't you feel like someone is watching you?" Yichen glanced at her. "Don't look around while walking." Mosheng fell silent. Perhaps she was the one being too expressive. As they walked to the school gate, Yichen received a call from Xiangheng. "Are you at home or the law firm? Come out, many classmates have come today." Su Min said if you didn't show up, she would go to your house and drag you here. Su Min was Yichen's previous student union president in the law school, who stayed at the university after graduation. Yichen had frequent interactions with her during their time at school. I'm at the North Gate. Where are you guys? Oh, you're here. That's great. We are at the new building. Come over quickly. Yichen hung up and said to Mosheng, let's first walk around our department and then go to yours. Ha! Our department. I'm not going. Mosheng hesitated for a moment. Why? Yichen became alert. He almost forgot that there might be some situations with so many people around. After all these years, he realized he still had certain conditioned reflexes. There are so many people from our department. Mosheng mumbled. Yichen used to be a prominent figure in the law school, and many people knew about their on-again off-again relationship back then. She didn't want to face those inquisitive gazes. You can go alone then. Besides, I want to take some photos, and I feel more inspired alone. If that's the case, why did he bother to come out? Yichen was a bit helpless as he held Mosheng back. You didn't bring money. How are you going to find me later, and how will you get home tonight? Seeing Mosheng's embarrassed expression, he knew she hadn't considered these points. Sometimes, he felt like he was taking care of a child. He sighed, it's better if our future children take after me. Ignoring his digression, Mosheng extended her hand, give me some money. Yichen only handed her his own money, I'll call you later. Don't wander too far. If you need me, call Xiangheng. I really don't understand what you're afraid of. Yichen smoothed her hair that the wind had messed up. He knew how Mosheng felt, but these things were trivial. He could just follow her lead. Yichen, now that you're famous, you've become quite arrogant. As soon as Yichen arrived at the law school's new building, he was met with mockery from Su Min. Knowing her senior's temperament, Yichen knew that the more he argued, the more spirited she would become. So, he didn't bother defending himself, and Su Min's taunt stopped after a few words. Xiangheng looked at his outfit, when did you become so stylish? Yichen looked down at himself. The t-shirt with the big red letters, C University, did look quite foolish. He smiled and took it off, holding it in his hand. Xiangheng immediately understood, why didn't you bring that girl with you? Who knows where she went? Yichen also felt a headache. As they were talking, many acquaintances came over to greet them. While they were chatting, Su Min pulled Lao Yuan to the side. Does Yichen have a girlfriend? Lao Yuan rubbed his chin and confidently answered, no. A wife wasn't the same as a girlfriend, he made that distinction very clear. Why is he still the same? He's still wholeheartedly waiting for someone else. Su Min knew quite a lot about Yichen's past and couldn't help but be a bit disdainful. But it's okay if he doesn't have one. There's a new young female teacher in our department. She's beautiful, from a good family, and has a high educational background. I'll invite her for dinner tonight and introduce them. You don't say anything, okay? Lao Yuan naturally kept quiet, looking very pleased. Originally, Yichen had planned to greet them and leave, but unexpectedly, he couldn't escape. First, they visited a few professors together, then attended an alumni forum. By the time they left the building, it was almost 5 o'clock. Lao Yuan invited some familiar faces to have a meal at the Binjiang Grand Hotel. The Binjiang Grand Hotel was the only 5-star hotel near the university, and it seemed like Lao Yuan was about to spend a lot of money. Yichen borrowed Lao Yuan's phone and called Mosheng. In truth, Mosheng had no specific plans for taking photos. She had simply grabbed her camera on her way out. Yichen went to the law school, while Mosheng headed towards her own department. Due to her average score in the college entrance exam, she was assigned to the chemistry department, which didn't have many advantages in C University. Moreover, her worst subject was chemistry, and it was all thanks to Yichen that she managed to pass every course in her first year. Mosheng had only stayed in the chemistry department for a little over a year before frequently studying at the law school, so she wasn't very familiar with her own department. She wandered around the chemistry department but didn't run into anyone she knew. Leaving the chemistry department, she randomly took a couple of photos, feeling a bit bored. Her hand touched the money in her pocket, and she couldn't help but think of Yichen. She wondered what he was doing in the law school. Recently, she and Yichen seemed to have suddenly become closer, especially after her return from Hong Kong. The way they were getting along now made Mosheng happy, but sometimes she felt uneasy. She couldn't quite understand Yichen's thoughts. Actually, it had always been like this. She could never quite figure out what was on his mind. Would everything go back to the way it was one day? Mosheng didn't want to dwell on these thoughts anymore and kicked at the dirt on the ground while muttering to herself, "Since I can't figure it out, I'd better keep things simple." C University was livelier than ever today, with people everywhere, young students and old alumni with white hair. This land had witnessed the youth of countless people. Perhaps because Mosheng was wearing a t-shirt with C University printed on it, people often approached her to ask for directions or where certain buildings were located. Mosheng would answer their questions based on her memory. As she walked, a young man in a suit stopped her. "Excuse me, do you know where Hui is giving his speech?" Mosheng was stunned by the question, almost doubting whether she had heard it correctly. "Hui? Who are you talking about?" Mosheng asked, bewildered. Hui, the internet sensation from China, the CEO of So. He's giving a speech here. The young man looked anxious, and seeing Mosheng's confusion, he immediately turned to another student and asked the same question. "In the first grand auditorium. Why are you going now? The speech started at 2 and goes until 4. You won't be able to squeeze in." Although she said that, the female student still pointed out the direction to him. The young man hurriedly thanked her and ran towards the first grand auditorium. Mosheng stood there, taking some time to process the information. Hui. He had returned to China. And he was at C University now. The first grand auditorium, which could accommodate thousands of people, was already packed. Fortunately, the university had set up electronic screens outside to broadcast the speech. Mosheng stood among the crowd, looking up at the confident and eloquent man on the screen. He had a broad forehead symbolizing wisdom, strong and determined eyebrows reflecting his personality, a face with sharp lines that lacked gentleness, yet showed the calmness and occasional sharpness of someone who had experienced life's trials. This was Hui, the self-made internet tycoon from Silicon Valley. The emerging tech billionaire worth billions of dollars. Her nominal ex-husband, perhaps, her actual one as well. The topic of Hui's speech was ordinary, the development and forecast of China's IT industry. However, his unique perspective, powerful analysis, and special identity made his speech stand out. Due to his background in science and engineering, Hui emphasized factual evidence. The future of IT that he depicted was not a fantasy but a logical deduction based on feasible foundations, making his speech more convincing. His legendary success story also excited the audience. Furthermore, his handsome appearance, or more precisely, his robust and resolute handsomeness, elicited screams from female students amid the applause. At least among the crowd outside the auditorium, a group of female students had been captivated by Hui's charisma and charm. "He's so handsome. I would even accept him if he were older." Come on. Who said he's old? He's only 34, in his prime. If I had a husband like him, he'd be talented, successful, and good-looking. I'd proudly show him off. Forget it. If you wanted to marry someone like him, you should have done it before he became successful. It's too late now. Hey, did you hear? When Hui was still a student here, he had a girlfriend who was considered the campus beauty in our department. This statement attracted the attention of others who had been focusing on the speech. What department are you guys from? A male student asked. Foreign languages. And now? Are they still together? I just heard it from someone else. It might not be true. The female student emphasized, then continued, during university, Hui was very poor, coming from a rural background and was famous for being talented in the mathematics department, which was filled with geniuses. Later, he pursued the recognized campus beauty in our department, and they had a good relationship. Unfortunately, when they graduated, the beauty accepted the pursuit of the department head's son to secure a position at the university. Hui then gave up his job offer from a domestic research institute and went abroad. Ah, the department head's son's wife. Are you talking about the one who taught us British literary history? I heard she got divorced recently. Oh my, you think she regrets it now? Who knows? The girl stuck out her tongue. We heard this during the dinner when we won the scholarship, and the counselor said it, so it's quite reliable. The chattering discussion continued heatedly, as people were always interested in celebrities' past and privacy. Mosheng pursed her lips, looking up at the confident Hui on the screen. Hui rarely mentioned his past to her, perhaps because she was still a young girl of 23 or 24, and he regarded her as a little sister. Only once, Hui had casually mentioned, I had a girlfriend at C University before. She was very smart and beautiful. He stopped there, seeming to be unconsciously nostalgic. At that time, Mosheng didn't know what to say, so she replied, my ex-boyfriend was also amazing. Oh. Hui laughed, your ex. Boyfriend didn't have my luck. Mosheng still remembered the look in his eyes at that moment, a mix of contradictions, melancholy, and pride, deep within his usually calm gaze. Over these years, she hadn't seen anyone buying Ji's side. Maybe he was like her, unable to let go of people from the past. Mosheng thought in a daze. Unconsciously, the speech was coming to an end. The last scene on the electronic screen was the students rushing up to the podium and surrounding Hui. Then, the broadcast stopped, and the promotional video for C University's centennial celebration began. The crowd that had gathered outside the auditorium gradually dispersed, and Mosheng followed the crowd. Suddenly, she remembered the last conversation she had with Hui when she was returning to the US, and he saw her off at the airport. If you don't go back to the US, then let's not contact each other for now. It wasn't that there were no regrets, they could have been good friends. If so many things hadn't happened. Her chest felt stuffy, and Mosheng felt a bit dizzy. In this carefree, sunny afternoon, the buried emotions resurfaced because of Hui's appearance, like a nightmare replaying. The fear of being in a foreign land, the embarrassment of not being able to communicate, the anger of being discriminated against, the silence she gradually got used to because of the mockery of her accent, and then the despair when she saw her father's suicide in the newspaper after 2 months in the US. At that time, everything felt like a web woven by demons, and she couldn't break free, engulfed in endless despair. Chapter 10, No Avoidance, Part 2. Two little tigers, running fast. The sudden sound of two little tigers ringing out brought Mosheng out of her daydreams. This slightly childish ringtone was picked by Mosheng when Yichen was too busy to pay attention to her. Although Yichen frowned for a long time after hearing it, he never changed it back. The ringtone rang twice before Mosheng answered the call. Mosheng. The moment Yichen's low and mellow voice sounded, Mosheng couldn't understand why she felt a kind of emotion similar to being moved. It was as if a warm breeze had blown through her heart, making the whole world tranquil and benevolent. Her eyes became moist. Yichen, I miss you so much. Mosheng heard herself say, or rather, the version of herself that was Zhao Mosheng in a foreign country, speaking to Yichen. I miss you so much. Yichen, do you know? Once, standing on a foreign street, surrounded by unfamiliar skin colors, I couldn't even catch a glimpse of your back. Now, I can finally tell you that I miss you so much. The accumulated tears in her eyes finally overflowed. There was no sound from the other end of the phone. Only the quiet breaths of each other and the distant noise of cars remained. After a moment, Lao Yuan's loud voice came from the other end. Yichen, why did you stop while walking? You're standing in the middle of the road. Yichen was startled and coughed lightly. I got it. The distinguished lawyer stumbled over his words for a moment. Where are you? Mosheng looked around. I don't know. After the speech ended, she followed the crowd, but now she had lost track of where she was. Lost? No wonder. Yichen's voice sounded hoarse. All right, just come to the Binjiang Grand Hotel across from the north gate of the university. I'll wait for you at the hotel entrance. Binjiang Grand Hotel. The table that Lao Yuan reserved somehow got taken by someone else. The lobby manager kept apologizing, saying they would arrange another one as soon as possible. The group of people didn't mind and sat in the lobby, chatting and waiting. Apart from Su Min, Lao Yuan also invited a few friends he used to hang out with. After entering society, they didn't have many opportunities to get together, so now they finally had a chance to chat and have fun. Su Min took the opportunity to introduce the female teacher she had brought along to Yichen. Although the male lead seemed a bit absent-minded, seeing the shy and occasionally glancing looks from the female teacher towards him, Su Min was secretly pleased. At least half of her plan seemed to be working out. As they were talking, Xiang Heng, who was sitting by the window, suddenly stood up and stared outside. Yichen, who was sitting across from him, subconsciously turned his head and saw a large truck dangerously brushing past Zhao Mosheng, who was barely standing with a frightened and pale face. Relieved that she was safe, Xiang Heng said with lingering fear, Yichen, your wife is really scary. She just crossed the road without paying attention to the red light. Before he could finish his sentence, Yichen had already stood up with a cold face and walked out. Su Min, who saw Zhao Mosheng's face from a distance, was taken aback and asked Old Yuan, wife? What does he mean? Old Yuan chuckled, wife means wife, not girlfriend. The young female teacher looked puzzledly at Su Min, as if asking why she was introducing her to someone who was already married. Su Min felt awkward and glared at Old Yuan. In the distance, Yichen held Zhao Mosheng's hand and walked ahead. As they crossed the road, he let go of her hand and stood by the flower bed, seemingly giving her a stern talking to. Xiang Heng smiled, recalling the past. It had been a long time since he had seen such a scene. Yichen was always mature and composed during his university days, seldom losing his temper, except when it came to Zhao Mosheng. Whenever she did something wrong, he would scold her for a long time. It brings back memories, Xiang Heng said, his eyes filled with a gentle smile. He couldn't help feeling happy for his junior brother. Su Min shook her head and said, back in our law school, there were so many talented and beautiful girls. Many of them liked him, but he ended up with someone from another department. I told him he should have chosen a department's beauty queen to match his status as the law school's #1 talent, but she doesn't have anything special. During the time Mo pursued Yi Sheng, most of the law school students watched the pursuit with amusement. No one believed that Yi Sheng would accept this girl, especially when he had rejected others with better conditions. So when Yi Sheng started bringing Mosheng to class and self-study sessions, many people were surprised. Some regretted not being more proactive back then. After Mosheng went to the United States and Yi Sheng became single again, some new female students showed even greater enthusiasm, but Yi Sheng managed to get rid of them in just a few days. Once, Su-min couldn't help asking him, "You hate it when others pursue you, but how come you didn't hate Mosheng back then?" She regretted saying that immediately, realizing it was too impulsive. She never thought Yi Sheng would answer her. "That's different," Yi Sheng said back then, simply and calmly, just 3 words. Su-min couldn't figure out what was different. Perhaps it was because he gave Mosheng a chance to pursue him, but not others. Old Yuan interjected, "When it comes to matters of the heart, only the person involved knows best. Don't worry about it." As Yi Sheng and Mosheng approached, Yi Sheng still had a serious expression, while Mosheng looked like she had been scolded and her greetings to everyone were quieter. Mosheng used to be a frequent visitor to the department office, so she naturally knew Su-min. Seeing her, Mosheng greeted her, "Hello, senior sister." Su-min responded with a forced and was about to say something when she was interrupted by a surprised voice. "Mrs. In." The loud and enthusiastic voice suddenly silenced the noisy lobby. The not-so-fluent English caused some laughter, but the well-dressed middle-aged man, who was the center of attention, was completely unaware. He rushed through the lobby and came to Mosheng, who was standing there stunned. "Mrs. In, Mrs. In. Mr. Ying's wife." The middle-aged man was so excited that he was speaking incoherently. "I didn't expect to see you here. You and Mr. Ying came back to the country together. I am Lin Xianghe, the chairman of Dashi Corporation. Do you remember me? Last year, when I was in the United States, you and Mr. Ying hosted me. Now that you two have returned, I must entertain you as well." Mosheng was dumbfounded. She recognized this middle-aged man. He had business dealings with Ying Hui's company. When he came to the United States last year, Ying Hui had invited him and his wife to a banquet at their home. But why would she meet him here, at the worst time and in the worst place? Feeling the suspicious and surprised gazes of old Yuan and others fixed on her, Mosheng couldn't summon the courage to look at Yi Sheng's expression. However, in the next moment, a warm and powerful hand held her slightly trembling hand. The same hand that had angrily pulled her across the road. But now, it held her with a comforting strength, tightly grasping her hand. Mosheng slowly turned her head and saw Yi Sheng looking at her, his eyes filled with pain and calmness. He had already figured it out, hadn't he? Sure enough. Mosheng heard Yi Sheng's clear and calm voice. "I apologize, she is no longer. You've mistaken the person." The unfinished words were swiftly interrupted by Mosheng, leaving Yi Sheng puzzled with a hint of confusion in his eyes. Mosheng gently freed her hand from his grip and repeated to Chairman Lin, "You've mistaken the person." Her voice was surprisingly calm. Although she knew she would eventually have to face that marriage, it was definitely not the right time, nor in front of so many of Yi Sheng's friends. Yi Sheng might be able to endure it, but she didn't want him to be subject to other people's gossip and judgment because of her past. Yi Sheng had always been so proud. Mistaken? How could that be? Hee, Mrs. Ng, don't tease me. Chairman Lin awkwardly laughed, feeling a bit embarrassed but unwilling to leave. During the standoff, the hotel door was pushed open. The uniform welcome from the waiter and the imposing presence of the newcomer captured everyone's attention. Accompanied by a large group, a handsome young man walked in, carrying a precious handmade suit in his hands. He exuded an aura of confidence and calmness with each step, and the bright lights in the lobby added to his distinguished appearance. Su Min noticed someone from C University among them and couldn't help but take a few more glances. However, she couldn't figure out who the man in the middle was, to make the school leaders be so eager to please him. At this moment, Chairman Lin shouted joyfully, waving his hand, "Mr. Ng, Mrs. Ng is here." The word Mr. Ng reminded Su Min of someone in an instant, Ng Hui, the CEO of So-So, the one who donated a building to the university. As Lin called out, Ng Hui stopped and turned to look at them, followed by the people around him. He stood still for a few seconds, raised his eyebrows, and then walked straight towards them. It was as if he hadn't noticed Mosheng, who was standing there unable to react. Ng Hui walked past her and greeted Chairman Lin politely. "Oh, it's Chairman Lin. I was planning to visit you tomorrow, but I didn't expect to meet you here." Chairman Lin, with delight, said, "Oh, how can that be? It's an honor to meet Mr. Ng." "Ha, Mr. Ng, this is Mrs. Ng, but just now, Mrs. Ng insisted that I had mistaken the person." He pointed at Mosheng. Ng Hui glanced casually at Mosheng, then laughed. "She does resemble someone, but my wife is on vacation in Switzerland." "Chairman Lin, it seems your eyesight is not so good." "Ha. Ha." Chairman Lin suspiciously glanced at Mosheng but quickly said, Yes, you are right. Now that I look again, she doesn't really look alike." He then repeatedly bowed to Mosheng. "I'm sorry for mistaking you, Mississippi. I'm really sorry." Mosheng lowered her eyes and shook her head slightly. "Since we just met by chance, Chairman Lin, would you mind joining us for a meal?" Of course. As Ng Hui and Chairman Lin gradually walked away while talking, Mosheng raised her head and saw Yichen looking at Ng Hui's departing figure, his deep eyes filled with complicated emotions. Sensing her anxious gaze, Yichen looked away, lowered his head, and spoke to her, his tone much gentler than when he scolded her on the roadside. However, there was still a hint of seriousness. "Think about how to write your reflection when we get home." Mosheng looked at him dumbfounded, her mind in a jumble. Yichen took the cigarette from old Yuan and said, "How to cross the road, I just told you. How could you forget so quickly?" Mosheng remained silent. Ng Hui and his group were led by the waiter to a private elevator. Right before the elevator doors closed, Ng Hui seemed to glance casually at their direction and coincidentally locked eyes with Yichen's deep gaze. This brief incident left everyone unsure how to react, but seeing Yichen looking unperturbed, they quickly resumed chatting and laughing. They didn't doubt the couple's relationship, given Ng Hui's identity. If Yichen and Mosheng were really married, that would be truly incredible. The hotel manager soon informed them of a vacant table and expressed apologies for the inconvenience caused by their delay, offering an 80% discount on everything except the beverages as a compensation. Old Yuan was instantly delighted, calculating the money they saved. The atmosphere at the table became lively as they talked about many funny incidents from their time at the law school. Even though Mosheng was preoccupied with her thoughts, she couldn't help but laugh occasionally when she heard something amusing. Some people even recalled the jokes Mosheng made during criminal law class and used them to tease her. Mosheng felt embarrassed and asked Yichen quietly how he knew about those things, considering they were not in the same year. Yichen smiled and said, "Don't you know you're famous?" Professor Zhou even mentioned Mosheng during classes for the following years, telling the story of a girl who attended his class with her boyfriend, and how she was unexpectedly chosen to answer a question. He recounted the incident with great enthusiasm, often making the students burst into laughter. There was even a junior who wasn't very familiar with Yichen, asking him in a friendly manner, "Are you the boyfriend of that girl who wanted to lock up people? Hee, why have I never seen your girlfriend?" But Mosheng was no longer there at that time. After being filled with drinks by old Yuan, Yichen stood up to go to the restroom. Following the waiter's directions, he found the restroom and pushed the door open. However, there was already someone inside. At the moment when Yichen entered, the man washing his hands straightened up. Yichen subconsciously halted, meeting the man's gaze in the mirror. Hui. For a moment, silence enveloped the small restroom. "How, Yichen?" After a moment, Hui spoke first. "I've heard of your name." I dare not." Yichen looked directly at Hui with a calm expression. "Mr. Ying is the one truly renowned. Why aren't you curious about how I know your name?" Hui turned off the tap, turned around, and his eagle-like eyes showed a gentleness that didn't match his rugged appearance. He said deliberately, "My ex-wife once searched for your name in the search engine I developed." By the time they returned home, it was already late at night. Mosheng had been generously given drinks by old Yuan and Su Min during the banquet, and when they left the hotel, she was swaying and had to be supported by Yichen. As soon as she sat in the car, she tilted her head and fell asleep. Yichen carried her back to the bedroom. Once on the bed, she automatically curled up under the covers and fell asleep. Her cheeks were flushed, and her long eyelashes were quietly drooping. Yichen stared at her for a long time before finally lowering his head and kissed her forehead. "Did he ever kiss you like this?" The low, ho. Ar's voice betrayed the emotions he had been hiding. In his eyes was a pain that he never wanted her to see when she was awake. Yichen lowered his head and breathed in the same air as Mosheng. "Had he ever been this close to you? Had he ever received your smiles and all your warmth? Had he ever?" Yichen ordered himself not to think further. But he couldn't help but feel sad that he didn't have that much broad-mindedness. He minded her wandering soul. Mosheng continued to breathe evenly. Yichen gently tucked her in, then got up and left the room, closing the door. In the deep night of November, the chill had seeped in. Even in this bustling city, there were very few people on the streets. Hui sat by the window of a 24-hour tea house, watching the man walking toward the tea house. The night's darkness concealed the man's elegant appearance, but his outstanding temperament still shone through. Hui had anticipated that the man who had left an indelible mark on Mosheng must be remarkable, but he was surprised by just how outstanding Yichen truly was. If he and Yichen were in the same era at C University, who would win and who would lose? Hui evaluated, taking into account his own past when he was also an outstanding figure at C University. If that were the case, maybe he would have met Mosheng first, and perhaps everything would have turned out differently. But then again, even if he had met Mosheng during his college days, he, who was once proud and arrogant, probably wouldn't have taken a liking to her. Fate truly was a strange thing. In the midst of Hui's thoughts, Yichen had already sat down across from him. "I thought you might be late." "I'm always punctual," Yichen said calmly, briefly glanced at the menu, then handed it back to the waiter. "Mao Jian, thank you." The waiter left to fulfill the order. Hui looked at him and suddenly asked, "How would you be willing to give up?" This rather provocative question didn't trigger any emotional outburst in Yi Chen as Ying Hui might have expected. He gazed steadily at Ying Hui and replied, "Mr. Ying, I don't think this question holds any practical significance." Talking to a lawyer is really headache-inducing. Ying Hui smiled wryly, leaning back in his chair with fingers intertwined. "It seems that Mosheng didn't mention me to you." The situation in the lobby earlier had already made Ying Hui aware. She didn't say much, indeed. Yi Chen had forbidden her to talk about it before, and later, Mosheng probably didn't dare to mention it, and he, too, subconsciously pushed this issue further away. This wasn't in line with his character. However, when he met Mosheng, unexpected things always happened. Ying Hui smiled again, lost in thought for a while, and then asked, "Is lawyer He interested in hearing my version of the story?" "Since I'm here, of course," Yi Chen replied. However, amid the lingering fragrance of tea, Ying Hui fell silent. Perhaps he truly didn't know where to begin with those things. Chapter 11 Ying Hui, Part 1. 7 years ago, Ying Hui experienced a turning point in his life, the most hopeful yet most despairing year. At that time, Ying Hui, who was studying at S University in California, came from an ordinary rural family. Due to his impoverished background, he had never entertained the idea of studying abroad during his time at C University, despite his outstanding academic performance. His dream, as a math genius highly regarded by many professors in the math department, was merely to find a relatively stable job with a decent salary, bring his parents to live with him, get married, have children, and live a simple life. However, this dream quickly turned into a mirage. On the eve of graduation, his girlfriend of 3 years broke up with him with a mix of sadness and determination. Ying Hui was caught off guard and couldn't comprehend it, especially after hearing that she had been intimately involved with the son of the department head for some time. A hint of anger surfaced amidst his disappointment. "Ying Hui, even if I did wrong to you, it's over now," his girlfriend said with anguish in her eyes. "I used to think naively about this society. But when I really started looking for a job after graduation, I realized that no matter how capable you are, without connections, no one takes you seriously. You know about my application to stay in school, but do you know how much I suffered? You can't help me at all. He is not as good as you in many ways, but at least he can give me the upper hand in front of those arrogant old women in the department. Ying Hui, I don't want my pride to be eroded by the mundane life in the long years to come. Maybe you will succeed in the future, but how many years do I have to wait for that? By that time, I will no longer be youthful. What's the point of enduring all the hardships for a better future? I don't want to live with my head bowed. You can't protect my dignity, Ying Hui. I still love you, but I'm sorry, I'm too proud." Ying Hui was left speechless. That night, he couldn't sleep a wink. The next day, with bloodshot eyes, he called his parents and decided to apply for a scholarship to study in the United States. Ying Hui's departure was swift. On the day he left for the United States, his classmates came to see him off, but his girlfriend didn't come. Unlike his other classmates, who were indignant and reluctant to part, Ying Hui remained calm throughout. However, no one could have guessed that beneath his composed gaze lay immense ambition. Life in California as a student was even more arduous than back in his home country. The unfamiliar environment, frequent part-time jobs, and heavy academic workload caused him to lose weight within a short period. But at the same time, his horizon expanded significantly. Ying Hui's focus gradually shifted to the rapidly developing internet. His solid mathematical foundation allowed him to excel in studying computer technology, and unlike the prevailing trend of building web portals at the time, Ying Hui was interested in information retrieval. After burying himself in research for a year and a half, he independently developed an optimized search algorithm that deserved the title of genius. However, the algorithm had a flaw. It required various other optimization algorithms to work together, so initially, it didn't attract the interest of venture capitalists. Only a well-known internet indexing company wanted to buy it at a severely undervalued price. Hui knew that what he held in his hands was worth far more than just a few $1,000s, but he didn't have time to wait for a better opportunity. After enduring long-term fatigue and pressure, he fell seriously ill, and his few remaining savings were depleted. In his desperation, Hui had an idea. He used the last of his money to place an advertisement in a well-known Chinese newspaper, explaining his situation and seeking investment from the Chinese community. However, reality quickly dashed his hopes. Within 10 days, he received only one phone call, which turned out to be an angry scolding, accusing him of being a shameless and despicable fraud, tarnishing the reputation of the Chinese people. Just when he was ready to sell the algorithm to that company, he received a letter from N-City. The letter contained an unsigned note and $500. The handwriting on the note was not particularly neat, with only a few words that didn't reveal the sender's gender. Hello. I saw your plea in the newspaper. I'm sending $500, which is not much, but I hope it can help you wait for a real investment. $500, a drop in the bucket, but it rekindled Hui's fighting spirit. That money sustained him through the most difficult 2 months. During that time, he finally developed the complementary algorithms and soon received his first $1 million venture capital investment. Timing makes a hero, and Hui undoubtedly encountered the best timing. Several years later, when he sat in the office of Soso's president listening to the asset appraiser telling him how much his assets were worth, he found it unbelievable. If it weren't for that initial $500, perhaps he would only be an outstanding technical professional today. Hui had thought about finding the person who supported him, but he quickly gave up. In this vast sea of people, the letter didn't even leave a name, making it nearly impossible to trace. However, not long after, that person appeared before him on their own. One day, a former classmate from S University came to visit him and brought a letter. This person probably didn't know that you had left school. They sent the letter to our department, and I brought it to you when I saw it. The handwriting on the envelope looked familiar. Hui's heart pounded with excitement as he opened the letter. Mr. Ng. Hello, I don't know if your address has changed or if you still remember me. About 3 years ago, you posted a plea in the newspaper, and I once sent $500. It's really hard to bring this up, but if you are financially capable, could you return the $500 to me? I know it's an unreasonable request, and if it causes you trouble, then forget about it. I'm really sorry. Xiao Sheng. Xiao Sheng. Hui silently repeated the name in his heart. Finally, he knew the name of the person. He glanced at the postmark, and the date of the letter was a month ago. Perhaps they wouldn't have written such a forlorn letter of hope if they weren't in dire straits. Hui quickly dialed the phone number left on the letter, and after 2 rings, a clear female voice answered the call. The next day, Hui flew to N-City. They had arranged to meet in a park during early spring, in the season of tender green. Hui spotted a Chinese girl sitting on a bench, wrapped in a scarf, looking a bit cold. She rubbed her hands with the scarf to keep warm. Hui stood at a distance, watching her. Suddenly, he felt a warm sensation, as if he had returned home. At that time, he had already been alone in the United States. For 6 years. Hui approached her. Excuse me, are you Miss Xiao? The girl immediately stood up. Yes, I am. Are you Mr. Hui? Only then did Hui get a clear look at her. She was was a very young girl, probably in her early 20s, maybe still a student. Her clothes looked a bit old, suggesting they had been worn for several years, but they were clean, and she had big eyes. He smiled faintly. "Miss Xiao, shall we find a place with heating to sit and talk?" After some awkward small talk, Yinghui asked, "I'm a bit curious, Miss Xiao. Why did you send me that money back then? Weren't you worried that I might be a fraud?" This question stunned her for a moment, and then she somewhat hesitantly replied, "At that time, I happened to have some money." She brushed over the details vaguely and continued, "Actually, Mr. Ng, you didn't need to come all the way here. I just found the old newspaper when I was cleaning up and didn't have much hope when I sent that letter." "Then what about now?" Yinghui didn't make things difficult for her. The story progressed after that. Miss Xiao didn't have enough evidence to prove Mr. Cruz's violent tendencies, and even if she managed to do so and got him stripped of custody rights, she still couldn't adopt the child. She didn't meet the state's adoption requirements regarding age, financial conditions, and marital status. The child would be sent to a welfare institution, which was definitely not a good place for a mixed-race child. Yinghui's personal lawyer, Mr. Smith, said, "Miss Xiao doesn't have enough evidence to prove Mr. Cruz's violent tendencies. Even if we manage to get the evidence and strip him of custody rights, she still can't adopt little Jia. Her age, financial condition, and marital status don't meet the requirements for adoption in this state. Little Jia will be sent to a welfare institution, and you know, that's definitely not a good place for a mixed-race child." "Yes," Yinghui said, "but I don't like spending money on scoundrels. Moreover, he might not be satisfied and keep extorting money, or he could bite back at any time. This isn't a fundamental solution. Unless Miss Xiao gets married immediately and marries someone who meets the adoption requirements, maybe that could increase the chances of success," Smith shrugged, jokingly. "You meet all the adoption requirements." Smith's joke sparked something in Yinghui. He realized that he didn't actually object to this idea. Yinghui conveyed the lawyer's words to Mosheng during a phone call. "Even if you prove Mr. Cruz's violent tendencies and strip him of custody rights, you still can't adopt little Jia. Your age, financial condition, and marital status don't meet the requirements in this state's laws. Little Jia will be sent to a welfare institution. You know that's not a good place for a mixed-race child." Mosheng was at a loss. "I just wanted to help a friend. Why is it so difficult?" Perhaps it wasn't difficult. Yinghui had spoken to Cruz once, and it turned out he only wanted to extort money. However, Yinghui didn't facilitate his plan. Yinghui had seen little Jia, a black-haired, black-eyed, somewhat foolish mixed-race child, who was said to have become dull-witted due to being beaten when he was younger. "If you've decided to bear this burden, I have a suggestion," Yinghui said casually. "You can find someone trustworthy and who meets the adoption requirements to fake a marriage. Maybe I can help." The person on the other end of the phone was dumbfounded. "How can that be?" Yinghui didn't insist. Things progressed from there. Cruz's photo of burning little Jia with a cigarette while drunk was accidentally taken by Mosheng's landlord. However, as Smith, the lawyer, had said, although Cruz lost custody, little Jia was still sent to a welfare institution. Mosheng was busy with her studies and work, but she still went to see little Jia every other day or two. A few months later, Yinghui received a call from Mosheng. Her voice was tinged with crying. "Mr. Ng, I want to adopt little Jia." Little Jia had been bullied by children of other races in the welfare institution. This had happened more than once, but this time, it was more severe. Little Jia was pushed into the toilet bowl. If it hadn't been discovered in time, he might have suffocated to death. Hui brought a draft of the agreement when he went to N City. The content of this agreement is that you give up all the rights and benefits that come with this marriage. Correspondingly, you don't have to fulfill any obligations. In other words, we will only be married in name. Hui explained. The clear division of rights and responsibilities made Mosheng's attitude more relaxed. This was exactly Hui's intention. He knew very well that this agreement, which gave Mosheng no advantage, would make things easier for her. Mr. Ng, thank you. She didn't know what else to say. No need. Actually, this marriage is also beneficial for me. My company is about to go public, and the image of a married man would gain more trust from shareholders. Moreover, being married could spare me from a lot of troubles. Hui said with somewhat laughable reasons, but the last sentence was sincere. Besides, Miss Xiao has done more than just a drop in the bucket for me. That's why he wanted to protect her under his wings. But was it just for that reason? Hui dared not ask himself. He watched her hesitate as she signed the document, as if something was extinguishing in her eyes. Then, she grasped the pen tightly, quickly signed her name, and handed it back without even looking at it again. Chapter 11 Hui, Part 2. On the night when Mosheng successfully gained custody of little Jia, Hui flew back to California. Mosheng's studies were not yet completed, so she remained in N City. Due to the regular inspections at the welfare institution, Hui had to fly to N City at the end of each month. While Mosheng felt guilty about the trouble he faced, Hui eagerly anticipated the end of each month. Hui's Caucasian secretary, Linda, cutely said, "Boss, you don't know how much I like the end of each month. You're always so kind and amiable at that time." Hui smiled, feeling content. Little Jia remained naive and foolish. Mosheng had worked hard to teach him to call Hui Uncle Ing in Chinese, but Hui wasn't moved by the address. Yet, Mosheng was overjoyed and touched, gently patting little Jia's head. In that moment of being captivated by her smile, Hui realized that he had fallen for her. It had been a long time since he had felt this way. He had only known this Miss Xiao and Mosheng for a few months, but this feeling came unreasonably and seemingly without cause. Hui, with his scientific nature, was determined to find the logic behind his infatuation. However, he realized, for the first time, that he was powerless to prove the cause and effect relationship of his feelings. Thankfully, he quickly pulled himself out of this spiral of thoughts and decided to go with the flow. Nearly 2 years passed since Hui's frequent flights to N City. One day, Mosheng called him with 2 pieces of news. The first was that she had graduated. The second was that Zhuangjie had been released early, and she decided to take little Jia back to their home country. After hanging up the phone, Hui's first thought was that it was about time. At N City International Airport, Hui finally met the dusty-faced Zhuangjie. Mosheng had occasionally mentioned Zhuangjie's experiences. She had originally come as a dependent spouse, but the man married an American woman for a green card. Zhuangjie's departure had been quite grand, but now she found herself in such a sorry state. Unwilling to return to her home country to be ridiculed, she quickly married an American man, only to find herself in even greater misfortune. After 2 years in prison, she was finally hopeless about this place and decided to return to her home country. Mosheng held little Jia and felt reluctant to part. Zhuangjie thanked Hui, "Thank you for the past 2 years. You should thank Mosheng enough." Zhuangjie looked at Mosheng, "She's much luckier than I am." Hui understood the envy in her eyes and sneered, "Everyone has their own karma. There's no need to force anything." As the plane took off, Mosheng looked up at the departing aircraft. do you really want to go back to your home country? Hui asked. Mosheng hesitated for a moment before shaking her head. No. I guess I'm quite cowardly. It seems natural to be alone in a foreign land. Every foreigner is like that. But if I go back and still end up alone, that would be really sad. She lowered her head, not wanting to continue the topic. As they walked out of the airport, Mosheng said, Hui, there's something I want to discuss with you. Hui knew exactly what she wanted to talk about and quickly said, that's perfect, I have something to ask for your help as well. Hui's parents were coming to the United States to visit him for a month because he had accidentally mentioned that he was already married. Hui asked Mosheng to help him deal with his parents. The timing was just right. Mosheng had completed her studies and was ready to leave N City at any time. Hui's company was on track, leaving him with more free time. After Mosheng arrived in California, she first looked for a job. Unfortunately, being a Chinese woman made her face many obstacles. Hui intended to use his connections to help her, but Mosheng declined. Hui, you've already done so much for me. I can't keep relying on you. Hui remembered that Mosheng had never accepted his financial help before, and he recalled what his ex-girlfriend had said when they broke up, leaving him feeling somewhat emotional. Mosheng looked at him curiously. What are you thinking, Hui? Hui smiled and said, nothing, just redefining the word pride for myself. Mosheng didn't understand, but she didn't press further. On Valentine's Day, before Hui's parents arrived, Mosheng was distractedly searching for someone named HeYiSheng. Mosheng's occasionally absent-mindedness is called HeYiSheng. Mosheng inexplicably smile is called HeYiSheng. Mosheng's sudden loneliness is called HeYiSheng. Mosheng started mentioning this name frequently to him, as if she had finally found someone to talk about that person. How smart that person was. How capable that person was. Of course, Hui became impatient. But when he saw the sadness and desolation in her eyes and the corners of her mouth while talking about that person, impatience turned into sympathy, accompanied by a strange pain. Even though he knew that Mosheng considered him only as an elder brother, Hui still had a confident feeling that he believed there would be no one better than him by her side, so he could take it slow. However, now that feeling had disappeared, and Hui clearly felt the icy wall Mosheng had built in her heart, excluding everything ambiguous. Perhaps he could only ever play the role of an elder brother. Hui became increasingly impatient. So the night arrived, whether due to long pent-up emotions or a momentary loss of control. That night, he was out for a gathering and came back drunk, and Mosheng was busy taking care of him. Hui couldn't figure out if he was drunk or awake. If he was drunk, how could he remember every detail so clearly? If he was awake, how could he lose control like this? In a semi-conscious state, he pressed Mosheng beneath him. He woke up, and it was already early morning. The moment his consciousness returned, he rushed downstairs. The lobby downstairs was dark, and he vaguely saw Mosheng sitting on the sofa, hugging her knees tightly, her head hanging down. Hui had heard somewhere that when a person experiences great hurt, they unconsciously assume the fetal position like a baby, seeking comfort. He placed his hand on the light switch but didn't turn it on. Mosheng suddenly spoke weakly, Brother did you mistake me for her? Hui was bewildered for a while before realizing who her was. His ex-girlfriend. He had only mentioned his ex-girlfriend to her once, and he couldn't remember what he said, but she thought he still had feelings for her. Mosheng, do you think everyone clings to the past like you do? Hui smiled bitterly. He found himself in an interesting dilemma caused by Mosheng. If he said yes, he couldn't reveal his true feelings, and perhaps he could never move forward. If he said no, he had to admit that he had become a rapist, even though it was unsuccessful. Facing Mosheng's trusting gaze, Hui finally chose to close his eyes and not answer. Let her find the answer that could console herself. In fact, after that, Mosheng could no longer stay calmly in the same room with him. When Mosheng proposed to move out, Hui said, "Mosheng, go back to your home country, take a look." Mosheng stood still. "You can't be an ostrich forever. Go back and take a look. If the weather is clear there, then stay. If it's gloomy and rainy there, then come back quickly. Completely forget about that place, completely forget about that person." At the airport, Mosheng bid farewell to Hui, who was no longer his nominal wife, and looked up at the traces left by the airplane in the sky, feeling a sense of loneliness spreading through every corner of his body. Did she understand the last thing he said? On some matters, she seemed astonishingly dull. "If you don't return to the United States, then let's not contact each other for now," he said to her before she boarded. Did he still have a chance? Perhaps. Maybe that person named Yichen had already fallen in love with someone else. In the world, how many people like Zhao and Mosheng were so naive? The fragrance of tea lingered. The long years were spoken in just a few hours. "I didn't expect there was more than one," Hui said at last. "Sometimes she is surprisingly dull," Hui sighed. "The world is so amazing. I never thought that, for these matters, you are the only one I can talk to." Yichen remained silent, finished the last cigarette, and picked up his clothes from the side. "It's late, Mr. Ng, I'll leave first." "Why rush like that?" Yichen hesitated for a moment. "Mosheng is drunk, and I'm a little worried." "Mr. He, are you showing off your success to the defeated?" Hui laughed. Yichen didn't look back and walked out of the tea house quickly, opening the door to the cold outside. Yichen took a deep breath. His clenched hand gradually loosened. He arrived home at 2 in the morning. Mosheng, who was drunk, slept obediently, curled up under the blanket, exactly the same as when he left. He quietly took off his shoes, got into the blanket, and hugged her close. She moved a bit, adjusted to the new position, furrowed her brows, and only when Yichen relaxed his arms, her brows smoothed out again. Her hair filled his nose with her fragrance. Yichen whispered, "I won't let you drink alcohol anymore." She didn't protest, still sleeping sweetly. Yichen couldn't fall asleep, keeping his eyes open until past 4 in the morning, sighed, got up, and went to his study. There was a lot of work to be done, and even the materials for tomorrow's court hearing were not fully prepared. For Yichen, this was a rare occasion when he had to make last-minute preparations. He worked until dawn. Yichen closed his tired eyes, rubbing his brow, and when he opened them again, he saw Mosheng standing at the study's doorway, looking at him. "Yichen, have you been awake all this time?" Mosheng asked him, biting her lip. This was her little gesture when she was nervous. Yichen understood. "Come here." He beckoned. When she came to his side, Yichen held her in his arms and placed her on his lap. "Are you awake now? I've never seen someone get drunk and fall asleep like that." "Ha." Mosheng was probably confused by his attitude and foolishly asked, "Then what should I have done?" "Do something meaningful," he said, lowering his head and covering her soft lips. When Mosheng gasped for breath, leaning against him, HeYiChen remained silent for a moment before saying, "Last night, I went to see Hui." The body in his embrace stiffened. "He told me that someone had searched for my name on the search engine. I wanted to ask that person what they found." Mosheng remained silent, and HeYiChen continued, "I just searched for your name using mine and found out that you once won a photography award. You never told me. It's not a prestigious award, and you never asked," Mosheng replied softly. HeYiChen sighed and hugged her tightly, saying, "My apologies, it's my fault. Now tell me, Mosheng, what have you been up to?" "In the United States." "Yeah." This gentle side of HeYiChen, even during the best times of their relationship 7 years ago in college, Mosheng had never experienced. With a simple, tender inquiry, he effortlessly brought out all the grievances she had accumulated over the years. Mosheng began to talk about the things she experienced in the United States, how she couldn't speak English when she first arrived, got lost, and went even further in the wrong direction while trying to read street signs, how she disliked learning English, the strange habits of foreigners, and the terrible food, emphasizing the awful taste of a certain brand of instant noodles. "Why didn't you eat something else? Everything else was expensive, and I was really poor at that time. Didn't your father give you any money?" This was the first time HeYiChen spoke calmly about Mosheng's father. Mosheng glanced at his expression before continuing. "He did, a substantial amount. At first, I was scared, but then I read in the newspaper and found out, so I sent that money to the embassy." "Did the embassy send you a commendation letter?" "I didn't leave my name. I sent it during a Chinese donation event. I didn't have any noble intentions. It was just that she couldn't spend that money, earned at the cost of her father's life, in peace. Moreover, she deluded herself into believing that without that money, her father wouldn't have died, as if none of it had ever happened. Right, Mosheng is very smart. What else?" And then Mosheng had thought that one day she would talk to HeYiChen about these things, but she never imagined it would be like this. She didn't feel any heaviness as she recounted the painful experiences. It was just like an ordinary chat. Those experiences that had caused her so much pain seemed to have vanished overnight. The conversation gradually waned. The day had completely dawned. "HeYiChen, I'm not sad at all. I thought I would be when talking about these things. You have me now." Mosheng didn't reply, and her head rested on his chest without moving. For so long that HeYiChen thought she had fallen asleep, he suddenly felt the dampness on his chest. It was already Monday, and they had to go to work in the morning. HeYiChen fought an unprepared battle for the first time in court and found that the prosecutors and the judge seemed even more clueless than him. So they all went through the proceedings in confusion, and the case would be re-examined later. The relatives of the parties involved saw HeYiChen looking obviously sleep-deprived and thought he had been working hard on the case, thanking him repeatedly. HeYiChen could only laugh or cry. Mosheng went to work with her eyes still swollen and hadn't recovered yet. Xiaohong seriously examined her eyes and asked in a heavy and mournful tone, "Did you break up?" Mosheng lowered her voice, cooperating with Xiaohong's mournful expression. "Comrade Xiaohong, do you want to buy beef rice to console the wounded?" Xiaohong continued to ponder seriously for a moment and said, "Then you better not break up." On the newspaper that Lao Bai bought, there was a headline about Hui. Mosheng saw it when she passed by his desk and picked it up. The newspaper extensively reported Hui's life experiences, praising him with many flattering words. At the end, in typical tabloid fashion, there were various guesses about his wife as told by Hui. Mosheng put down the newspaper, dazed for a long time. She didn't have many acquaintances in the United States. There was Aunt Wan, but after Aunt Wan returned to China, she never contacted Mosheng again. The only one left was Ying Hui. In fact, Mosheng was more grateful to Ying Hui than any other emotion. After all, he had helped her so much, and that time when he got drunk, there were no lasting consequences. After hesitating for a moment, she opened her computer, typed in the SoSoMail website, and entered her rarely used mailbox from after her return to China. She found Ying Hui's email address. She changed the content of the email several times before ending up with only one sentence. Big Brother Ying, thank you for what happened in the hotel lobby last night. A few minutes after sending the email, the mailbox prompted for a new message. Mosheng refreshed the page and opened it. Recipient, Xiao Mosheng. Sender, Yichen. Subject, no subject. No need. These two simple words, though sent after a long time, perhaps the sender had drafted and thought about the reply many times. In that instant, Mosheng seemed to understand something, but in the next moment, that intuition slipped away. The cursor hovered over the delete key, hesitated for a moment, and then moved away. Finally, she just closed the mailbox. Perhaps she would never use this mailbox again. The letter would quietly lie in some corner of the internet, unopened and never erased. Autumn quickly exited amid the arrival of a cold wave. Under Xiao Hong's influence, Mosheng became interested in knitting scarves, but unfortunately, she always knitted the wrong stitches, resulting in a messy, uneven pattern. HeYiSheng was very grateful for her good intentions but couldn't bring himself to wear the scarf around his neck. On Christmas night, HeYiSheng invited Yi Mei and her boyfriend Zhang Su to dinner. Zhang Su was Yi Mei's boss's boyfriend and was very humorous. It was the first time HeYiSheng had met him. After dinner, they went outside and found that it had started to snow. Young people and children on the street cheered and jumped, celebrating the first snow of winter in a city. Mosheng and Yi Mei stood on the roadside, waiting for HeYiSheng and Zhang Su to return with the car. Yi Mei smiled and said, "Originally, I was going to ask you to be my bridesmaid at my wedding next year, but who knew that HeYiSheng couldn't wait, but I can't blame him. He must have been holding back for a long time." She winked ambiguously. Mosheng blushed. When did Yi Mei become so improper? Yi Mei burst into laughter, turned her head to see Zhang Su waving at her from across the street, and said to Mosheng, "I won't keep you waiting. I'll leave first." "Okay. May you two be very happy, even if," she said softly, almost inaudibly, "it's for me." Mosheng was taken aback. She ran across the street to catch up with Yi Mei, who was now walking fast, and said, "Yi Mei, Yichen, did you see her this time? Maybe you still have a chance." There was no response for a long time. Mosheng regretted a bit. Perhaps she had crossed a line. There were parts in everyone's heart that couldn't be touched. Maybe that person was the deepest wound in Yi Mei's heart. In the evening, Mosheng talked to HeYiSheng about this. HeYiSheng glanced at her and said in a somewhat puzzled tone, "As expected, you are dull." Then he added, "Luckily, you are a bit foolish." Mosheng was stunned. Over a month later, Mosheng saw Ying Hui's reply when she was cleaning out her various email accounts. The date on the email was 2 days ago. Mosheng opened it. Recipient, Xiao Mosheng. Sender, Yichen. Subject, no subject. Not everyone can endure loneliness like Yichen. Sheng, I have changed my mind. P.S. Merry Christmas. Mosheng stared at the screen in a daze. Just 2 lines, yet it took so long for them to be sent. Perhaps the sender had also written and contemplated the reply many times. In that instant, Mosheng seemed to understand something, but in the next moment, that intuition slipped away. The cursor hovered over the delete key, hesitated for a moment, and then moved away. Finally, she just closed the mailbox. Perhaps she would never use this mailbox again. The letter would quietly lie in some corner of the internet, unopened and never erased. Autumn quickly exited amid the arrival of a cold wave. Under Xiao Hong's influence, Mosheng became interested in knitting scarves, but unfortunately, she always knitted the wrong stitches, resulting in a messy, uneven pattern. Yichen was very grateful for her good intentions but couldn't bring himself to wear the scarf around his neck. On Christmas night, Yichen invited Yi Mei and her boyfriend Zhang Su to dinner. Zhang Su was Yi Mei's boss's boyfriend and was very humorous. It was the first time Yichen had met him. After dinner, they went outside and found that it had started to snow. Young people and children on the street cheered and jumped, celebrating the first snow of winter in a city. Mosheng and Yi Mei stood on the roadside, waiting for Yichen and Zhang Su to return with the car. Yi Mei smiled and said, "Originally, I was going to ask you to be my bridesmaid at my wedding next year, but who knew that Yichen couldn't wait, but I can't blame him. He must have been holding back for a long time." She winked ambiguously. Mosheng blushed. When did Yi Mei become so improper? Yi Mei burst into laughter, turned her head to see Zhang Su waving at her from across the street, and said to Mosheng, "I won't keep you waiting. I'll leave first." "Okay." Mosheng nodded. Mei took a few steps forward, but she didn't look back. "May you two be very happy, even if..." She said softly, almost inaudibly, "It's for me." Mosheng was taken aback. She ran across the street to catch up with Yi Mei, who was now walking fast, and said, "Yi Mei, Yichen, did you see her this time? Maybe you still have a chance." There was no response for a long time. Mosheng regretted a bit. Perhaps she had crossed a line. There were parts in everyone's heart that couldn't be touched. Maybe that person was the deepest wound in Yi Mei's heart. In the evening, Mosheng talked to Yichen about this. Yichen glanced at her and said in a somewhat puzzled tone, "As expected, you are dull." Then he added, "Luckily, you are a bit foolish." Mosheng was stunned. Over a month later, Mosheng saw Hui's reply when she was cleaning out her various email accounts. The date on the email was 2 days ago. Mosheng opened it. Recipient, Xiao Mosheng. Sender, An. Subject, no subject. Not everyone can endure loneliness like Yichen. Sheng, my heart has changed. P.S. Merry Christmas. Mosheng stared at the screen in a daze. Just 2 lines, yet it took so long for them to be sent. Perhaps the sender had also written and contemplated the reply many times. In that instant, Mosheng seemed to understand something, but in the next moment, that intuition slipped away. The cursor hovered over the delete key, hesitated for a moment, and then moved away. Finally, she just closed the mailbox. Perhaps she would never use this mailbox again. The letter would quietly lie in some corner of the internet, unopened and never erased. The night of the light snowfall, the bustling streets filled with people. For the first time, Mosheng felt that Christmas was a holiday. Chapter 12, So It Turns Out, Part 1. This year, the Lunar New Year came unusually early. Christmas had just passed, and in the blink of an eye, it was already the Spring Festival. Naturally, they had to return to Y City for the new year. Y City wasn't far from a city, and under normal circumstances, it would take just over 3 hours by car. However, due to the New Year rush, Yichen and Mosheng set off in the morning, and by the time they arrived in Y City, it was already past 1 in the afternoon. Mosheng had noticed that the people around her had been unusually quiet for a long time. Yichen couldn't help but turn his head. She had been nervous since yesterday, but why did she feel better after arriving in Y City? Mosheng was staring blankly out the car window, not even noticing Yichen's gaze that had been fixed on her for a long time. An inexplicable emotion flashed through Yichen's eyes, and he paused for a moment before speaking up, calling her name, Mosheng. Ha! It took Mosheng a moment to react, and she turned to him, asking, "What? Do you know how to play mahjong?" Mahjong? Mosheng suspected that she had misheard. Auntie likes to play mahjong. If you don't know how to play, she might be disappointed. Yichen said casually, but he deliberately made it sound serious. Mosheng was taken aback, and all the thoughts that had been swirling in her mind vanished, leaving only the word mahjong. What should I do? I'm not very good at it. Mosheng was extremely upset. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I'm not prepared at all. There's still time to prepare now. Yichen smiled faintly and parked the car. Mosheng, we're here. How long had it been since she had celebrated such a lively New Year? Outside the window, the snow was flying, and the sound of firecrackers kept coming from afar. The whole family sat together, eating the New Year's Eve dinner, while the elders chattered endlessly. You two children are becoming less filial as you grow older. One of you has a boyfriend and didn't tell your mother, the other doesn't even mention marriage. Yi Mei made a face at Yichen. Mom, you've been saying this all afternoon. Since the children are rare guests, let them enjoy their meal. Stop nagging. Mister, he said. I think you're just tired of me. Mrs. He then turned to talk about Mr. He, afraid of his wife for his whole life. He immediately put on a pitiful face. Zhang Su, who couldn't understand the dialect, kept pestering Yi Mei to translate, and Yi Mei was annoyed. A grown man was acting like a spoiled child. Mosheng listened with a smile, having been used to spending the New Year cold and lonely abroad. In such a warm atmosphere, she even felt hesitant to speak. After dinner, Mrs. He organized everyone to play mahjong. Yichen had long escaped to the study, while Yi Mei volunteered to wash the dishes. So, only the obedient Mr. He, Mosheng, and the future son-in-law were left at the table. Mrs. He was an old hand at playing mahjong, and Mr. He, who had been her sparring partner for decades, was not weak either. Yi Mei's boyfriend was a businessman, naturally calculating. Unfortunately, Mosheng had spent so many years abroad that she knew little about the traditional Chinese game. She was drafted in, but ended up losing miserably. Yichen came out of the study, unable to believe what he saw. Less than an hour, and you've managed to lose so badly. Mosheng was extremely embarrassed, stammering, just bad luck. Yichen patted her shoulder and told her to stand up. Let me handle it. This was called an evenly matched contest. Mosheng watched with increasing interest, and by 1 o'clock, she still didn't want to go to bed. Yichen tried to send her to bed twice, but she refused, so he finally put on a stern face, and Mosheng had no choice but to go to sleep. In the middle of the night, Mosheng woke up in a daze when she heard the door open. She turned on the bedside lamp. Are you done? Did you win or lose? Yichen lifted the blanket and lay down, looking tired. Auntie lost by herself. Chen glared at him. How can you three grown men be so shameless? It's the He family rule, no father and son at the gambling table. Besides, Auntie won't stop even if she loses everything. Yichen pulled her into his arms. Go to sleep, I'm exhausted. It's all because of you being so useless. Mosheng immediately felt guilty. He was already so busy with work, and now he had to endure such torment when he came home for the new year. It was really pitiful. So she obediently fell asleep in his arms and stopped bothering him. After a while, she felt his warm lips wandering around her neck, and Mosheng gasped softly, "Aren't you tired?" No. Yichen's voice was somewhat blurred. I can be even more tired. On the morning of the first day of the new year, Mosheng woke up at around 7 o'clock. She sat up and put on her clothes, but Yichen dragged her back into bed. Why are you getting up so early? Yichen said sleepily. To make breakfast. Let go. Mosheng struggled to free his large hand that was holding her waist, but Yichen didn't even move a finger. Mosheng helplessly gave up. Yichen. Sleep with me a little longer. Really? Mosheng muttered, Yichen, you're acting strange today. Yichen's body stiffened, and he fell silent for a few seconds before his voice sounded somewhat unnatural. What's strange? Simply acting like a child. Mosheng complained. Yichen's fingers relaxed slightly. Stop making trouble and go to sleep. There seemed to be no one moving outside, and Mosheng compromised. After all, she couldn't break free from him. Then let me sleep a little longer. However, this sleeping position was uncomfortable. With her eyes closed for less than a minute, Mosheng became restless again, tried to push away Yichen's arm that was lying across her head. How could a girl sleep like this? Yichen opened his eyes. Can you stop moving? Mosheng frowned with a distressed look, wanting a pillow. Pillows were softer and more comfortable. Yichen, your arm will get sore sleeping like this. She really was considerate of him. If she slept on her own, the result would probably be that they both caught a cold. So, she better held him tightly, and Yichen pretended not to hear her, closing his eyes to sleep. Mosheng stared at him for a while, but there was no solution. She couldn't fall asleep in her. Eyes wandered around the room, finally stopping on the handsome face in front of her. Yichen is really good looking. She kissed him quietly, and Mosheng finally felt a little drowsy, her thoughts becoming vague as she planned to wake up a little earlier. But when she opened her eyes again, it was already past 10 o'clock, and Yichen wasn't in bed. Mosheng quickly got up, put on her clothes, and walked out of the room. Yichen and Mr. He were playing chess in the living room. Mosheng felt a little embarrassed and called out softly, Uncle. Mr. He smiled and nodded at her. Mosheng walked over to Yichen and complained in a low voice, Why didn't you call me? Aha! Yichen was holding chess pieces, his mind focused on the board. After making his move, he looked up and said, Go help Auntie in the kitchen. Oh. Mosheng looked into the kitchen, where only Mrs. He was busy. Alright. Mrs. He saw Mosheng come in and greeted her with a smile. You're up. Did you sleep well last night? Mosheng nodded in a hurry. She was probably the latest one to get up, so how could she not be used to it? Auntie, let me do this. She took the knife from Mrs. He's hand and started cutting the meat into strips. Mrs. He picked up some vegetables to wash and chatted with Mosheng, talking about this and that. Suddenly, she exclaimed, realizing she had forgotten to ask a question that she should have asked a long time ago. Look at me, I'm so forgetful. Little Sheng, your parents. Mosheng was taken aback, nearly cutting her finger. She bit her lip, should she say it? She looked up and saw Mrs. He's kind and gentle smile. Mosheng didn't want to deceive her, so she decided to tell the truth. My father. Mosheng. Her words were interrupted, and Yichen appeared at the kitchen door, his face a little pale, and his jaw tense. What's the matter with this child? Suddenly appearing like that scared me. Mrs. He patted her chest. Yichen's expression eased a bit, but his eyes didn't relax. Mosheng, where did you put my coat? I can't find it. Oh. Mosheng was stunned for a moment and washed her hands before going to the bedroom. The coat was hanging on a rack next to the bed, in a very conspicuous place where it could be seen as soon as one entered the room. Mosheng stood in front of the rack, feeling a whirlwind of emotions in her heart. Yichen took off his coat from behind her. Don't overthink things. I just don't want them to have any ideas about you. He sighed softly. Mosheng, have a little more confidence in me. His words contained a hint of bitterness that made Mosheng's heart ache. She had thought too much. Yichen. I would rather you be careless and thoughtless. Don't think too much. Yichen rubbed her head. It's quite troublesome. But you won't feel distressed. Let's go out to eat. Auntie should have finished cooking. During the meal, Mrs. He asked about Mosheng's parents again, and Mosheng only said that her father had passed away and her mother was overseas. Mrs. He sighed twice and didn't ask further. She only thought about persuading everyone to take a walk after the meal for a little exercise. Unfortunately, no one wanted to participate. Mr. He wanted to take a nap. May wanted to take Jiangsu to visit famous attractions in Y City, so Mrs. He could only give up reluctantly. As for last night, Yichen couldn't get much sleep, so he used the afternoon to catch up on rest. Mosheng woke up late in the morning and had no desire to sleep, so she started playing with Yichen's old stuff while he was sleeping. She found pleasure in studying an old exam paper for a long time, observing how he wrote back then and checking the mistakes he made. She also read Yichen's old essays, one by one. His argumentative essays were excellent, usually scoring around 90 points. Mosheng couldn't help but feel envious, as she remembered her own argumentative essays back then, which were only scoring around 60. Fortunately, Yichen's expressive essays were not that good, which brought her some comfort. When Yichen woke up, he saw Mosheng sitting on the wooden floor, going through his old things, so he coughed to remind her, Mrs. He, you are invading my personal privacy. Yichen, you're awake. Mosheng looked up, her eyes shining brightly with excitement. Do you have anything else interesting? She had really become addicted to this activity. Yichen smiled and pulled her up, saying, don't sit on the floor. Bending over to look through the scattered items on the floor, Mosheng asked, why does Auntie keep all these things? How old do you think I am in this photo? Mosheng handed him an old picture. In the photo, Yichen was still young, looking handsome and upright, wearing the uniform of Y City No. 1 High School and holding a trophy. Probably when I was in my first year of high school, participating in the national physics competition. Physics. Weren't you studying law? Yeah, but I was in the science stream in high school. I wish I had gone to the same high school as you. Mosheng regretted, I could have gone there too, but I thought it was too far from home, and I knew I wouldn't be able to get up in the morning. Fortunately, you're lazy. Yichen sounded genuinely relieved. It gave me a peaceful high school life. Mosheng glared at him fiercely. Are there more photos? Yichen took out an album from the top of the cabinet. Not many, our family members aren't fond of taking pictures. The album was quite old-fashioned, indicating its age. When they opened it, they saw a baby picture with the words Yi Chen's 100 Days written on it. The baby in the photo looked fair and tender, with a slight frown between the eyebrows, looking very imposing. Mosheng stared at it for a long time in disbelief and said, "Yi Chen, it turns out you were so serious from the day you were born." "Babies don't have expressions," Yi Chen frowned. "They do." Mosheng argued, "My dad said I used to smile when I saw the camera in my childhood." Most of the photos after that were group pictures, showing a young woman holding a child, leaning against her young husband with happiness in their eyes. Even though the photo quality was poor back then, it still managed to showcase the woman's elegance and the man's handsomeness. Yi Chen resembled his father more in appearance. Mosheng fell silent and silently flipped through the only album. Then she looked up at Yi Chen. "I'm fine." Yi Chen took the album from her hands. "It's been so long, and any emotions have faded." Mosheng carefully looked into his eyes and finally felt reassured. "Shall we visit them to see how they're doing?" "Let's wait until Qingming Festival." Yi Chen gently stroked her hair that had been nibbled on by the puppy. "We'll go when your hair grows tidy, so you won't become an ugly daughter-in-law." The spring break wasn't too long, and most of the time, Mosheng was dragged by Aunt He to play mahjong for leisure. Unfortunately, after several days of intensive training, she didn't make any progress. She would look at the cards on the table and forget what she had, and when she looked at her own cards, she couldn't remember what others had played. Yi Chen could only shake his head and sigh. He didn't know if it was a relief or a pity that his wife wasn't talented in this area. At least she wouldn't lose money at the mahjong table in the future. The next day, Yi Chen and Mosheng bid farewell to reluctant Mr. and Mrs. He and started their journey back to City A. Wei and Zhang Su had to go to work earlier than them, so they left 2 days ago. Before leaving Y City, they went to Qinghenu village again, but this time, it seemed like they missed her again. Mosheng knocked on the door for several minutes, but no one answered. "Should we wait for a while?" Mosheng shook her head and said, "Let's forget it and leave." The old building had narrow and deep stairs, and when they were going downstairs, Mosheng gave some experienced advice. "You need to walk slowly on this kind of stairs, or you might bump into someone at the turn." Yi Chen looked at her and asked, "How many times have you bumped into someone?" "Not many," Mosheng mumbled. "It's okay, just a few times." It was actually many times, and not watching where she was going while walking was one of her habits. Yi Chen reached out and gently touched her cheek, looking left and right, before he let out a sigh. "Fortunately, you haven't bumped into anyone." Mosheng made a funny face at him. Sitting in the car, Mosheng looked back at the old building with a faint sense of melancholy. They still couldn't meet her this time, and although she and her mother were related, perhaps their fate was still too shallow. The car quickly left the entrance of the neighborhood. Mosheng looked out of the window casually, but she suddenly called out, "Yi Chen, stop the car." Yi Chen stepped on the brake, and the high-performance car came to a stop in the shortest time possible. Mosheng opened the car door and went after something. Yi Chen didn't get out of the car. Instead, he looked through the rearview mirror and saw Mosheng catching up with a slender middle-aged woman several dozen meters away. Suddenly, he felt a sense of irritability, and he subconsciously reached into his pocket for a cigarette, but he found nothing. He then remembered that he had decided to completely quit smoking recently, and he didn't have any cigarettes on him. He closed his eyes, sighed, leaned back on the seat, and turned on the car's audio system. Soft music flowed out gently, soothing his mind. After listening to the same piano piece for he didn't know how many times, he heard a tapping sound on the window. Yi Chen opened his eyes and saw Mosheng. He rolled down the window. "I just told my mom that we got married. Do you want to meet each other?" silence. From a distance, Mosheng's mother, Pei Fangmei, watched her daughter and a tall, handsome young man walking towards her. Her eyesight was not good, so she couldn't see his appearance clearly, but she vaguely felt that he had an outstanding temperament. It seemed that little Sheng had a good eye. However, Pei Fangmei frowned. Just now, little Sheng said his name was Yichen. Yichen, why does this name give her a familiar feeling? In the blink of an eye, the person was already in front of them, and Pei Fangmei could see his appearance clearly. Indeed, he looked like a talented individual. Mosheng introduced them to each other. This is my mother. He is the one I mentioned, Yichen. Hello, Yichen greeted with a faint voice. Pei Fangmei's thoughtful gaze lingered on him, and the feeling of something not being right grew stronger. She smiled somewhat reservedly and said, "So, you are Yichen. Little Sheng has a good eye." "Yes," Mosheng replied with a touch of embarrassment. None of them spoke further. There wasn't much to say. They all wanted to ask about forbidden topics, and greetings were exchanged with just a few sentences. "Yichen, do you have your business cards with you?" Mosheng remembered to ask. Yichen nodded and said, "They are in the car. I'll go get them." He quickly brought his business cards, and on the back, he hastily wrote down his phone number. He handed the card to Pei Fangmei and said, "This is my contact information. If you want to reach me, you can call this number." Pei Fangmei took the card, glanced at it, and said, "Since you're in a hurry to leave, I won't keep you." "Okay," Mosheng responded, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Then, we'll go." They hastily bid farewell to Pei Fangmei, got back into the car, and Mosheng's expression instantly became much more relaxed. It's good like this. After all, it's been 8 years since we last met. This kind of polite meeting makes it easier. Yichen didn't pay attention to what she said. He remembered the thoughtful and scrutinizing gaze from Pei Fangmei earlier, and he felt a bunch of doubts in his heart. Had she recalled something? Mosheng noticed that he was lost in thought and couldn't help pushing his hand. "Yichen, are you back on Earth yet?" With a clear, smiling gaze, Yichen's doubts remained unresolved, and his headache returned. Why did he feel that certain aspects of someone's personality, which had caused him so much headache in the past, were coming back to life? Could it be that old habits die hard after all? Chapter 12. So it turns out, Part 2. The fact proves that the words of the ancients are indeed reasonable, and his premonition is also correct. At 27 years old, Xiao Mosheng is certainly much more sensible than when she was 18 or 19, but some of Yichen's familiar little quirks have clearly not left him with age. For example, when he can't argue with reason, he resorts to being unreasonable. He becomes more and more fond of sticking to her. He lets her pick the dishes he doesn't like to eat, and so on. Well, lawyer, he secretly admits that he enjoys it. Besides, it wasn't easy to bring back these little temperaments of hers. The wedding banquet was scheduled for 1.5 months later, and Yichen planned to take some time off after the banquet. So during this time, he was busy finishing up his work, passing on tasks to others, and turning down invitations to be a special guest at legal events. As for the preparations for the wedding banquet, such as the guest list, booking the hotel, and other annoying things, Yichen took care of them all himself, leaving Mosheng relatively relaxed. In fact, all these tasks could have been handled by a professional wedding planning company, but Yichen clearly preferred to do it himself. However, Mosheng also had a headache. She couldn't find bridesmaids. Yimei was not available. She got married quickly after the new year. Xiaohong was even less suitable. Mosheng had already been scolded and treated to several meals because of reasons such as concealing the true marital status of the kind, pure-hearted people. When she mentioned it to Xiaohong, she screamed, "No, if I'm a bridesmaid again, I'll never get married." Her terrified expression made Mosheng feel guilty. And then there was Xiao Xiao. After hearing the news from Yichen, she called Mosheng on the phone and sounded much more gentle than the last time they met, even offering to be the matchmaker. In any case, none of them wanted to be bridesmaids. The final choice was a bit unexpected. That night, Yichen was in the bedroom studying some complicated materials, and he strictly forbade Mosheng from making any noise to disturb him. Mosheng was lying on the bed, writing invitation cards. Yichen had already prepared the guest list, she just needed to copy it neatly. But what were these characters? Yichen's handwriting was so sloppy. Mosheng held the paper and looked at it from all angles for a long time. She didn't recognize them. She bit her pen, wondering if she should ask Yichen. She glanced at him concentrating on his work. He seemed to have said not to disturb him. Forget it, maybe it's better to skip these for now. Of course, Mosheng was not such an obedient person. Back in college, she was best at appearing to comply while doing otherwise. But at that time, even if Yichen put on a sour face, he would just scold her a little and that was it. Now that they were married, some of Yichen's punishments had no bounds. Honestly, she was a bit afraid of him. Mosheng blushed at the thought. She couldn't have imagined Yichen being like this before. But it was so boring. As she continued to copy, Mosheng couldn't help herself and took a blank piece of paper to write. "Yichen, you made me and my colleague fall out." She handed it to him. This couldn't be considered as speaking to disturb him, right? Yichen had initially not intended to pay her any attention. He glanced at the words on the paper, which seemed rather serious, and wrote underneath, "What happened?" "It's Tao Yijing. You know, she found out that we knew each other before and got really angry. She thought I deliberately hid it from her, but how could I explain it to her with our past?" Yichen rubbed his forehead, then wrote on the note, "Is it serious?" and added a pitiful crying face. It's quite serious. I talked to her and explained carefully. I even asked her to be a bridesmaid, and she agreed, happy face, but she said she won't give a red envelope. Indeed, it was quite serious. Yichen tossed the note into the trash bin, and then pulled her up. "I think you're just bored." She was trapped in his arms, and he clasped his hand around her waist. She tried to climb up, her hands resting on his chest, and the fresh scent of his post-shower presence filled his nose. Yichen had a moment of fascination. All of this was his desire, and from now on, no matter what, he wouldn't let go. A few days before the wedding banquet, an unexpected visitor came to the law firm. Yichen had just returned from the procuratorate when Meiting said to him, "Lawyer He, a lady has been waiting for you for a while." Following Meiting's direction, Yichen saw the guest standing up elegantly as he approached. It was Mosheng's mother, HeYiShengXiaoMo. "Please, take your time." Meiting placed the tea on the coffee table in front of HeYiShengXiaoMo. "Thank you." HeYiShengXiaoMo nodded slightly. As the former mayor's wife, she was undoubtedly graceful and composed. Meiting softly closed the door, and the office fell into an unusual silence. HeYiShengXiaoMo observed the young man behind the desk in silence and began, "We briefly met last time, and you should remember who I am." Of course. Yichen replied casually, "Mrs. Zhao." The cold address increased HeYiShengXiaoMo's suspicion. She smiled more kindly and said, "You don't have to be so distant. Since you and Xiaoxing are married now, it's only appropriate to call me your mother-in-law." Yichen gave a faint smile but remained silent. HeYiShengXiaoMo smiled again and said, "If you're not used to it, you can call me Ms. Pei." Ms. Pei. This time, Yichen readily agreed. I'm curious about the purpose of your visit. Pei Fangmei took a light sip of tea and calmly said, in our brief conversation last time, Xiaoxing spoke highly of you. I'm just here to get to know you better, and there's no need for lawyer He to be so guarded. If Xiaoxing hears how concerned you are about her, she should be very happy. Pei Fangmei looked at the sharp-eyed young man and said kindly, are you feeling wronged for Xiaoxing? Xichen's face remained expressionless. HeYiSheng has never felt wronged. I don't need to go to such lengths. That's true. Pei Fangmei furrowed her brows slightly and sighed. From her childhood to now, I haven't fulfilled my responsibilities as a mother. On the one hand, I was busy with my career, and on the other hand, I didn't have a good relationship with her father. I've neglected her. Fortunately, she's not that sensitive, and she has grown up healthy. She paused, seeming to have some emotion. Then she continued, actually, I'm trying to make up for it now, but I'm not sure if there's still a chance. Facing her sincere words, Yichen was unmoved. If you want to express motherly love, there's no need to go through all these circles. I think you should go directly to Mosheng. Pei Fangmei carefully observed his expression. You seem to have hostility towards me. Perhaps it's just your illusion. An awkward silence ensued. Pei Fangmei lowered her voice and said gently, I hope you can make me a promise. Although I'm not close to Xiaoxing, she is still my daughter. There was no immediate response. Pei Fangmei, usually proud and confident, was already at her limit to bow down to Mosheng. She was about to turn and leave when she heard the young man behind her, in a calm and serene tone, make a statement. They gave me 10 years, and I want Mosheng for a lifetime. His voice was filled with an indescribable weariness, and he paused before adding, I succumb to the warmth of reality. Pei Fangmei was stunned for a moment, then she understood that this was the promise she wanted. She turned back. The young man standing by the French window was shrouded in a soft golden sunlight, and he gave her a desolate side profile. Pei Fangmei might have wanted to say something, but she heard his soft request. Mosheng tends to overthink things. Please don't let her notice these things. The office had returned to tranquility, and Yichen couldn't concentrate on his work for a while. He glanced at the time. It was almost time to get off work. He decided to close the case files and deal with them tomorrow. As he stood by the window, he was waiting for Mosheng to appear in his line of sight. It seemed that Yi had once asked him why he could wait so patiently. In fact, waiting had nothing to do with time. It was a habit that grew freely, and he couldn't resist it. Mosheng was already walking around with a camera, and she appeared in his field of vision, standing under the shade of a tree and lowering her head as she pressed some buttons. A new message popped up on Yichen's phone. Yichen, I got my bonus today. I'm treating you to dinner. I'll be there at your place soon. Yichen smiled faintly, as if she was right in front of him. He was about to reply to her when his phone rang. After the call, he saw 2 more messages. You're not replying, are you not home? Poor thing, where did Yichen leave you now? So impatient. Yichen couldn't help but shake his head. He had only been on the phone for about 10 minutes. He quickly replied to her, no need to come up, wait for me downstairs as usual. Yichen stood by the window, waiting for Mosheng to appear in his sight. It was as if Yi had asked him once why he could be so patient. Actually, waiting had nothing to do with time. It was a habit that grew freely, and he couldn't resist it. Mosheng appeared in his view with her camera swinging around. She stood under the shade of a tree, her head lowered as she fiddled with the buttons. Another message appeared on Yichen's phone. Yichen, I'm here. Come down quickly. As usual, I'll count to 1,000. End of the story.